Okay, good evening and welcome everyone. This meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, so welcome to everyone viewing on YouTube. Elected members of the committee unable to join the meeting in person are able to join remotely. However, they do not form quorum and will not be able to vote, and their attendance will not be officially recorded, although their virtual attendance will be noted in the minutes. Non-voting independent members ideally attend in person, but if unable to join the meeting in person, are also able to join remotely. They retain speaking rights and are encouraged to turn their cameras on when asking questions. With regards to the meeting etiquette, please may I ask that you indicate you wish to speak by raising your physical hand. People online should raise their virtual hand and we will monitor the screen for virtual hands. Please note that the chat function on Zoom will not be used in this meeting, and questions or comments on the agenda pack should be raised via the chair. Colleagues, this is a special meeting of the Audit Committee to deal with the business that was not dealt with on November the 2nd, 2023, because committee members asked for more time to consider Appendix B of the Internal Audit Report. Appendix B was the audit on pro governments. Members may recall there was a request to invite the Mayor to this meeting. However, I have overruled this because the Audit Committee is not a political body. Its focus should not be on holding members to account, but on examining issues or risks within the organisation, and the points raised in the reports are ones of political direction. Members may recall that the recent Centre for Governance and Scrutiny report raised concerns about the way scrutiny focused too much on holding the Mayor to account. So it would be counterproductive for the Audit Committee to start engaging in the same practice. Some councillors who are not members of the committee are attending tonight's meeting in respect of this agenda item. Provisions regarding councillors attending meetings are set out in the Council Procedure Rules, Part 4.1 of the Constitution, specifically Rule 34.4. Rule 34.4, attendance of non-members. Any member of the council can attend meetings of committees and subcommittees as an observer. Any such member may not vote, may speak with the permission of the chair, must leave the meeting at any time when the press and the public are excluded, unless invited to remain by the chair. I'd like to welcome members of those who are not members of the committee. Agenda item. Hello.
Chair, I'm not a member of the committee, but I may wish to ask some questions regarding the accounts. Do I have the permission for chair to do that?
I will see how that goes in terms of questioning from the committee members and whether the question has been covered by the committee members. Item 1, apologies for absence and substitute. I've received apologies from Councillor Ken Penton. Are there any other apologies for absence from members? Thanks, Clerk. Item 2, declarations of interest. To those members who are present physically, are there any declarations of interest? Item 3, minutes of the last meeting. Members are requested to consider and agree the accuracy of the decisions and minutes of the last meeting committee held on the 2nd of November 2023. Are there any matters of accuracy?
Chair, it's not a matter of accuracy. It's just one of the actions that we agreed at the last meeting was that the committee would receive a report showing the percentage of staff that complied with mandatory training. Thank you to the clerk Pauline who has done that for us. But that data is genuinely terrifying, and I've emailed you as chair in response to that. I appreciate it was over the Christmas period, so I haven't expected a response yet, but this is the first opportunity to raise that in public. I believe if I just get the data, there was no department in which a majority of staff had complied in any area.
Sorry, is this in relation to the minutes?
It's a question to you about what we can do next on this issue.
We'll take that at the end because we have a very full agenda, and this is about the accuracy of the minutes, not additional queries that you may have about a subject. Okay. Are there any matters of accuracy in relation to the minutes? No. Okay. Are the minutes agreed? Item 4, action log. Asked to note the contents of the action log. As this is a special meeting, most items are due at the February meeting. Are there any questions on the actions in the report? Councillor.
It's just action 184. I asked for 100% assurance for all our staff in the account have the right to work. I know it's coming back with coming to assurance, but it's noted on the corporate risk register in view of the financial to the council.
Okay, Pauline. You want to, what did it from?
Or there's a, hold on, it's up to the CMT, on the risk register, but it's just in taking into consideration on that risk register.
Okay,
Appropriate.
Conrad,
So, yeah, I can undertake then to ensure that the next time the corporate risk register comes to CMT, which will be en route to the committee in any event, that point is made and given appropriate consideration.
Thank you, Chair.
councillor Pierce.
Yeah, it's the same point from the previous agenda item. It's, so that action has been closed out. It's action 189, but that has opened up essentially that as a member of this committee, I'm not assured that the council is doing what it needs to do in regards to mandatory training. And one of the links in what we've been given doesn't work. Like you click it and nothing happens. So it appears that it's intended for extra detail to have been shared with us. That hasn't been. I would like an action about the council telling us what it is doing to improve rates of mandatory training and when they expect to get those to the target level, which I think was 95%, because I think I calculated it would take decades to do so at the current rate.
Okay, so in terms of the actual action, the report was supplied to us, but you have additional queries about.
Yeah, it's opened up another action.
Okay,
For a request from me, I don't know about how other committee members feel, that we need to be informed about what the council is doing to achieve the 95% target for mandatory training.
that's fine. Pauline, could you make a note and follow up, please, and ensure that the link can be supplied, that is an active link? No, that's not right. Thanks.
Not that anything needs to be done yet about it because we've still got until the 7th, but there has been a backwards and forwards about whether action AC 187 was reflective of what my question really was, but I know that that's being dealt with.
Yes, and Pauline did email today or yesterday regarding that, so.
But I've seen the follow-up to that.
Yes, so just for the record, councillor Booker's question is in progress, and as she's noted, it is due for February, so it is in hand. Okay. Okay, to members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands is the report noted? Thank you. Item 5, Appendix B, Pulpo and the addendum reports. To remind members of what the internal audit report said, I will recap the relevant paragraph from the agenda of the 2nd of November 2023. The purpose of the audit was to review council arrangements for overseeing Pulpo Living Limited. The review was based on relevant good practice guidance recently issued by SIPA on local authority controlled companies. The overall conclusion was that significant improvement is required in the council's arrangements for overseeing Pulpo Living Limited in those areas reported. Adopting appropriate actions to address each of the reporting findings will help the council strengthen their framework of governance, risk management and system of internal control. The report included a list of actions and timelines. Since the publication of Appendix B for the November meeting, the contextual addendum report has been published for this meeting. Members of the committee are members of scrutiny, and we have some scrutiny members here today who may speak at my discretion. Please remember this is a meeting of the audit committee and questions should be framed within our remit of good governance and internal controls. Note that the addendum report is divided into 7 themes, and I would like to group our questions into those themes, which are 1, lack of clarity with shareholder roles, the absence of scrutiny. 2, conflicts of interest and appointments. 3, council risk management and scrutiny. 4, reprofiling dividend payback and extending loan covenants. 5, business plans. 6, company review. 7, Grant Thornton and internal review report. Plus 8, any other concerns from the committee. This will allow 10 minutes per theme as a rough guide to ensure we get through the report. Would members also note that the copy accounts supplied upon your request as background information will eventually be published by Companies House. However, the auditor's letter supplies, these are marked as sensitive and not to be shared in the public domain. So when you are making questions, please do not make reference to the auditor's letters. So if you have queries about that, they will need to be taken offline. So please take note of that. And if you respond in that sense, I will stop your position. I invite the Officer Conrad Hall to give us any comments on the report and the subsequent addendum. I invite representatives from Virtu to comment if there is anything to add before we start our discussion.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's really much for me to add. I think the main purpose of the meeting will be to respond to questions that are raised. I did think I'd like to just emphasise, I know it was said at the last meeting, I just want to make sure that any misunderstanding is, it may have been Councillor Penton who raised the point. The audit report wasn't carried out to provide an assurance rating. So as the Chair rightly highlights, it is it's identified the improvements that are required, and very happy to talk about what we've done in respect, so on. When it says we have not provided an overall opinion for this work, I think at the previous meeting that was misinterpreted as saying the assurance level is sort of beneath that, if you see what I mean, by Councillor Penton at least, if no one else. So just to be clear, what that means from Virtu as the auditors is they weren't carrying out the work in order to provide an opinion in the conventional sense of satisfactory, limited, etc. It's an advisory piece of work in that sense. So it's the final paragraph that I think is more significant. But just because that point was raised at the last meeting, and because we were short of time, I didn't get to add that contextual explanation. I'll just add that there. Other than that, Chair, I'm perfectly happy that we simply move into questions in each area as you highlighted.
The floor is now open to questions, councillors. Any questions? Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is in the first theme, so I think it's right to ask it now. One of the things said in the report is neither the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee or Audit Committee currently have a role or any involvement with the company, and that was sort of raised as a concern. I'm new to Audit Committee, so I'm genuinely asking this question in some amount of ignorance. But what role, and it's a question for the auditors primarily, what role ought we to have as audit with the company? And what kind of thing would you expect to see that you haven't seen?
That was to Andy.
I think that question's for Anne. Thank you, Councillor Booker.
Andy, are you online?
I am. I'm just trying to work this out. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Thank you.
Excellent. Right. Obviously, that was our understanding that the reality is that the piece of work, as Conrad's mentioned, I would echo his words earlier, is that we were looking for the council to demonstrate that it had overall proper scrutiny of the company, proper challenge in place, that sort of thing. Now, that obviously can come from various areas and would include audit committee, would include scrutiny. So it was more, dare I say, just an awareness of what was going on, really, that we wanted to see. And our understanding was that there wasn't much of that. Now, obviously, it was commented on in the previous meeting that we would be provided with evidence to contradict that. And I don't know whether that has been provided. It certainly hasn't been provided to us. It may have been provided to your own internal audit team, but I'm not aware of that. So in terms of any evidence that's subsequently been made available, if it has, as I say, just to be clear, we haven't seen any of those things. So it's not specific information we're looking for. It was more an understanding and an awareness that the various committees who might have an interest in the organisation were involved and had the ability to understand what was going on and raise any questions should they feel appropriate.
Okay, Conrad, come in.
In terms of roles, I mean, the strict answer to the question, in my view, is there is no need the audit committee or the scrutiny committees necessarily to be involved in the oversight of the company, but equally there is nothing that precludes them having that role. Those really strict about it, the audit committee does have a role in approving the council's accounts. The council's accounts consolidate into them the accounts of the company. So in that sense, the committee automatically has a role in overseeing the accounts of the company. More generally, I would say, in terms of focusing the audit committee, on the activities that, you think are most important, what you've got here is a report explaining how the system works at the moment, whether or not you're content with that, we'll clearly have a discussion on that. You may then think, in consequence of that, that's fine, we're now content with the arrangements, we'll leave it to officers and, sort of pick up any issues that arise. You may think that it's necessary to insert the audit committee more formally into the arrangements, in terms of some sort of quarterly update against an action plan or whatever action you may deem appropriate. I think the important thing to bear in mind, and perhaps it will be helpful if through the discussion we sort of, explain the governance arrangements more fully. You have a company, that company has its own board and indeed its own audit and risk committee that provides a level of assurance. You have the oversight from the council that provides a level of assurance and so on. Other than receiving sort of confirmation that that is or is not operating as intended, you want to be careful about, I would say, automatically just inserting the audit committee and saying, well, we should therefore also carry out those roles. Your role is more, I would say, checking whether those processes are operating effectively or not, rather than trying to duplicate them. Does that help in terms of sort of trying to provide that differentiation?
Did you want to follow up quickly?
Yeah, it actually does help a little bit, especially considering in the same section, the conclusion is essentially that those processes aren't operating effectively. It says neither the shareholder group nor the shareholder representative roles are properly defined and are operating effectively, i.e. they're saying that they're not operating effectively. At the time, I think you didn't agree with those findings, and it said that changes will be made by December. We're now in January. I don't know if now would be an appropriate time to hear about any changes.
I think there are two different things going on. I mean, you asked about what the role of the audit committee ought to be. I've explained what I think the factors you ought to take into account in deciding what role you want to play ought to be. I wasn't commenting on the actual content of the report or what's being done in response or anything like that.
Okay, maybe we
can. And that will come out of the discussion, and perhaps you want to return to the point at the end of the whole meeting about thinking about what role, if any, you want in the future.
I think that was a perfectly legitimate follow-up question actually to the first one, because that's part of, we're doing this by themes apparently, which actually is a bit difficult for me just to say because I had questions that weren't in like that. So, but the first theme is to do with this first action point, which is where that comes up from. So we're saying one, that's your opinion of what the audit committee should do. That sounds very good. Actually, I agree with Andy that in the previous meeting, we did say that audit has been asking questions, and I think that was a point that you had made, Chair. The audit had been asking questions. We obviously haven't given that information to him as evidence. So I think potentially what Councillor Higgins was saying is, oh, great, that is what we're doing. And what we're seeing is that these systems haven't been working apparently according to the internal audit. So it feels like a perfectly legitimate question.
Okay, Councillor Chadder, please.
Can I just ask, the council are also investors, aren't we, in Poplar? The financial.
It's not the phrase I would use, but yes, I mean, we own 100% of it.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
So to my thinking, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm very naive on these issues, that essentially we have a role, audit has a very clear role to play in safeguarding the council's assets, in making sure that it's a good use of money.
Again, I hope I'm not getting us down a sort of governance rabbit hole here. I mean, completely, the audit committee has got absolute discretion to look at any activities of the council. There are many activities that we undertake that, for example, require borrowing and debt financing in order to undertake activities that the council has agreed are worth pursuing. So there's nothing, as I said, to preclude the audit committee choosing to take a role in the oversight of the company. I just think you want to be careful that in doing that, you're not duplicating existing arrangements unless you are not content that those arrangements are now working as they ought to be.
Just on a quick follow-up, where do those arrangements exist at the moment?
What arrangements for oversight of the company? Well, I mean, as set out in the report, there's a series of, groups and boards and so on. For example, the shareholder group, and also critically, Cabinet, which acts as the approver for all of these. So those are the arrangements that provide that oversight, and we can go into the detail of that.
That's quite clear in the report, but there's also indication in the report that those arrangements aren't working satisfactorily. So my question therefore is that audit does have that it does have a role, and I don't want us to go down a path where we think.
I didn't suggest it. I just said there's no need prima facie for an audit committee, generalise it, an audit committee to have direct oversight of a council's subsidiary company. Equally, there's nothing to preclude the audit committee using that it feels that it ought to. I mean, in other words, it's up to you, is kind of what I'm saying.
That at the end of each section, we probably take some recommendations or we have some action points.
Yes, that's what.
Chair.
Sorry,
Well, quick comment on this and then a separate question. I'm not sure why you've been so, first of all, Happy New Year. Secondly, I'm not sure why you've been so cautious about the audit committee playing a role, because one of our functions is to scrutinise the value for money controls over everything the council spends money on, whether it costs £1 or £1 million. Secondly, the principle of audit committee is to do duplication of some respects, right? Making sure that process is followed properly, as is external audit systems, etc. So I'm unsure why we're being cautious about the audit committee having a role here. My question is unrelated. My question is, how much did the council spend on commissioning this report?
Okay, so why am I being cautious? Just because there are many things that you could choose to focus on. There are many activity of the council that are, more expensive, arguably greater risk than this. And so you've just got to balance your prioritisation of your work plan accordingly. If you choose to focus on this, that's absolutely fine. In terms of the cost of this report, unless Andy knows the figure offhand, I'm afraid I don't, but I could get that circulated to the committee later. Actually, I'm not at work tomorrow, so beginning of next week. But Andy may know and be able to say immediately.
Sadly, I'm not aware of that, Conrad, but equally, I could find that out tomorrow.
Yeah, if you could let me know tomorrow, and then I'll arrange to get it circulated to the committee on Monday, please.
Thank you, Conrad and Andy. Councillor Paul, please.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to be a consensus that there is a role for audit, but the issue is how that's done efficiently. I can summarise my previous colleagues. So the question, therefore, is the appropriate level of oversight. I think is the contention between everyone. And obviously, if you look at the council's LATCO, local authority trading companies portfolio, it is wider than just popular, and it might be to way around this is the audit perhaps receives a report from the shareholder group which summarises the governance arrangements of all the LATCO companies. Because if I go back to the report, it says there's no evidence that the council holds popular to account. The Cabinet and the Mayor acting formally in the role of the shareholder. No formal like evidence of oversight, audit or overview. And the business plan has not been referred back to the shareholder accountability. So it would have been easier, perhaps as a recommendation, but yes, there's a role for audit board, the level of appropriateness, but perhaps an overview report is provided from the shareholder group to audit, and that way it'd be at the right level of resolution. So you could say X number, whatever LATCO company, is the business plan produced? Yes. What date was it produced? This. When was the account published? Just a very top line. That might be. It's up to the audit chair to decide on the committee. That might be a way of killing two birds with one stone. A, the audit committee gets the right level of resolution, an overview on the subject, for not overly bureaucratic and burdensome on officers to produce the report. Because I think we all can agree there is a role for audit, but at the moment there isn't a clear line of sight, but that is being how that's being done.
Can I just bring in Andy? Sorry, quick point of clarification for myself. You're saying in the report that you don't think the arrangements in place are strong enough. Is that the gist of what you're saying?
Right. Okay. So just to be fair,
Yeah.
again, I've got to agree with what Conrad is saying in relation to the council having proper arrangements. There is a role for audit committee if it sees fit to be included, but that level of including is got to be decided upon. It's ultimately something that the council needs to decide overall how it's going to manage its LATCO. Just to pick up on another point that the gentleman made previously, anything that's in this report that might relate to Popular may relate to other LATCOs. We've only looked at Popular, of course, but there may be similarities in the way the council operates its other LATCOs. However, what I would say, the level of risk may be entirely different as one difference in all of that.
Sorry,
yeah.
Andy, I just want, because I've got two councillors waiting. I think there may be just some misunderstanding and we just need you to confirm clearly what you're saying in terms of the governance arrangements. Are they appropriate or aren't they? I think that's what needs to be clearly stated, because the way you've said it, it's created a sort of dark cloud. So now, please, can you clarify for everyone here exactly what you're saying, please? So we get clarity to understand, because that will link into Councillor Paul's comment about the role for audit. If you're saying the current arrangements are not good enough, then that's why councillors are saying we need to step in as such. Conrad is saying there's already governance arrangements in place, there's already an audit committee there, and there's other things. So please clarify what you're saying so that there is clarity in what you've put in this report, please. Yeah,
what it might be worth saying at this juncture is everything that we've suggested in the report are observations based against what SIPFA are suggesting is good practice.
That's fine.
Now, obviously,
that's fine.
So everything that we've looked at, we've requested evidence to support the narrative. And what we are saying is that in general themes, we are saying there is a lack of evidence to support what needs to be in place. Okay, can I just stop you there? That's very, sorry, Andy, sorry, can I stop you? That is very clear, but I don't think you've made that clear in the report, what you've just said about the evidence. So because you haven't given that level of clarity and assurance in the report, it's created confusion. So that's why I'm asking you now to give that clarity so we understand exactly what you're saying. If there are processes already in place, but you're saying they're not evidence, that's different to what seems to have come out from the report. So please clarify. Yes, right. I understood that to be in the report. I will look at the report again because it's not clear because the questions. No, I take your point. Yeah, I take your point in that respect. But I did think a comment to that nature was in the report. But what I am saying is that we have struggled in certain areas to be satisfied with the level of evidence that was available. Okay. All right. Thank you, Andy. Councillor. And then I think Councillor Gitt, and then we're moving on from this point.
Yeah, no, well, actually, so my main point was to say that I think this is a bit of a red herring anyway. We have talked about Popular in previous meetings. It has come up here. We are talking about it. So we obviously do have some oversight of Popular. And I don't think that we need to try and put in additional levels or that sort of thing. Actually, I think that talking about it for such a long period of time is taking away from talking about a lot of the other stuff that actually is really serious, particularly around the lack of evidence that has been given, as Andy says. And so, yeah, that was my point.
Higgins, please, and then we're moving on.
I take what Councillor Booker has said, but just the final thing, to know as a committee whether we should spend our time on this, we need to know how risky this is compared to other initiatives the council is taking forward. Conrad said this is arguably not the riskiest thing that we do as a council, and so I'm wondering what in his opinion is more risky, because if I prior to this meeting had been asked to pick a top 3 sort of risky things that the council does, I would have said that this is one of them. So I don't.
You know, popular fundamentally is house building activity. You know, that is by definition, you know, a relatively high risk activity. You know, high risk, high reward, because that's meeting your sort of key policy goals. So, sorry, if it came across the wrong way, I wasn't intending to suggest that this wasn't a high risk activity. You know, there are plenty of other things that we do that are also very high risk. You know, look at all the social care activity, look at you know, building safety, for example. You know, the list could go on and on. That's just the nature of an organisation. I wasn't intending to suggest in any way that, you know, the activities of the company, which are house building, are not high risk when they are. That's just the nature of it. So I have no problem with the audit committee looking at it. I was just saying you've got lots of other things to think about, and if you want to start looking at how that goes, you know, you really thinking that, you know, your pest control service is one of your high risk activities, for instance. You know, those are the sort of balance. But I have no problem at all with the audit committee looking at this. And I think the sooner we get into the content of it, the better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Conrad. We're going to move on to the second point. I'll now move on to the next thing, conflicts of interest and appointments. Are there any questions?
Right, Chair, I mean, but I don't feel that the, you know, the actions, you know, in respect of the first theme have really been considered. I mean, we've just been talking about evidence. I mean, let me give a really practical example of this. You know, I could say, and, you know, I'm sure Deborah would back me up, you know, that at the shareholder meeting, you know, we have, you know, fairly robust conversations about whether the company is executing its activities in the right way. The point that Verito have made, which is entirely fair, you know, is there's no minute that provides some evidence that that actually took place. You're kind of in the position of taking our word for it, frankly. And, you know, so, you know, it's entirely right and reasonable that the audit report says, you know, we haven't got evidence that that scrutiny took place. I mean, you've got a degree of evidence in the sense that there was an agenda item and you can imagine that there was a discussion, but we can't sort of prove that it was of that nature. You sort of, you know, have to kind of take our word for it. You know, I think that, you know, that's this point about evidence. You know, and you have to have a balance. You know, meetings like this clearly should be formally minuted. You know, there are many internal council meetings at which, you know, important discussions are had. We don't create formal minutes of them all. If we did, the cost would be significant. So, you know, if your concern is, you know, does the shareholder group examine the activities of the company and provide a robust challenge to that? You know, I can say absolutely yes. Deborah, I'm sure, can talk about that. Darren, as a company council representative on the council's board, company's board, can talk to that. But we can't provide you written evidence that, you know, that sort of took place in the way that you're looking at here, because we haven't written minutes in that way. But, you know, I mean, the concern is there scrutiny of the company by council officers? My answer to that is yes.
Okay, can I say, as the chair of governance of 2 schools, I've done 4 Ofsted full inspections. In each of those inspections, Chair, if I turned around to the inspectors and they said, if they asked me about safeguarding or student well-being or whatever, if I turned around and said to them, I haven't got the evidence, I would fail the Ofsted, right? So, and I use that as an example in terms of to give an example to the principle that when you're doing accountability in the public sector, if the evidence doesn't exist, then you take it is not there until such time. Yeah. So I find it quite hard, Conrad, you know, and I sit there having been through the Ofsteds, but if I literally turned around and said, I don't have the evidence to prove safeguarding, the school would fail. So I find it quite hard for you to say there's no evidence, there's no minutes. At least we would expect action points to be taken from minutes, right? There's a difference, minutes and action points. I want to put it on the record.
Yeah, no, so I mean, Ofsted and safeguarding operate in a different framework, and in that framework, you'll be required to have formal minutes. There are notes of the meetings that are rough action points. You know, looking at those, you know, you couldn't see as a consequence, there must have been robust scrutiny. Now, if your recommendation as a committee is, I want you to create formal minutes of those meetings in future, fine. But, you know, there's just be aware, you know, doing it for one set of meetings is no problem. But there are many other meetings across the council where we could spend a lot of time creating minutes of each of them. And I'm not sure that in every case that's worth it. If you feel it's important in this case, then we'll do it. It's not a problem.
Councillor Chadder, please.
I would ask that we do take minutes for the reason that this is such a high risk issue. And I think, and also the other point, well, kind of moving on from Councillor Paul's point, is there is an issue here about corporate memory. And we know the turnover of staffing in the council is a concern. It should be in everyone's collective interest. You're appointing a non-executive director who's a member of staff. This is as much about safeguarding that individual on that board as anybody else and the existing members. So it's in the director's interest, it's in the council's interest, it's in the public's interest that minutes are taken.
I genuinely don't agree with the very last point about Darren Mackin's role, because the shareholder group, we do not use it as a formal decision-making group. I think that puts it in a fundamentally different space. Darren can absolutely talk about how conflicts are declared at formal company board meetings and cabinet meetings. There is a fundamental difference between meetings that are decision-making and those that are not.
It wasn't about the conflicts, it was about the process of a corporate memory. So even knowing that discussions were had is important. And also to evidence to your funders. I'm sure the GLA would also want to see evidence at some point that discussions were had.
That's it.
Okay, Councillor Booker.
Yes, it's not the first time that we've heard a response from you, Conrad, that is, well, of course we could provide that evidence, but it would cost money. I'm concerned, particularly as we do budgets and we look to the next year, that actually we're having to make huge amounts of cuts. And one of the areas that it seems like there is a lack of desire to ring fence and keep is on governance and is on ensuring that those processes are happening that make sure that we are reducing our risk, that we are managing those internal governance mechanisms well. It concerns me that this isn't the first time we've heard that from you.
Well, for the avoidance of doubt, I've said, and I'll repeat it, we will ensure that formal minutes of those meetings are created going forwards.
Councillor Higgins, please.
It's very similar to Councillor Booker's point, actually. My big concern is that we came away from sort of agreed action 1.1 being completely unclear about whether the council had agreed from this point on to take minutes or not. It's just like we accept that more could be done to evidencing this, although this comes at a cost.
I've just said,
sorry, Conrad, sorry if I can get to the end of my point. It's great that we've had this meeting and we've been able to clarify, we've requested that minutes be taken and that will happen now. But I don't love that we've got a situation where the report, it's left unclear and it's being left to us as sort of non-professionals to ask for this. I don't understand what your metric is for deciding whether to take minutes or not, whether something justifies taking minutes or not. We're clearly concerned, so we're asking for it, but you feel, I'm taking from this that you feel that maybe it's not justified, but I don't understand why.
Well, I've explained the point, but I've also accepted the committee's position. I mean, we can carry on the debate if that's helpful, but...
Sorry, that isn't my point, Conrad. My point is that I assume that you have some kind of framework about deciding whether to spend money on this form of governance or that form of governance. What is that framework? Because it's all well and good for us to step into the process and say, we care enough about this as councillors that we want to see these minutes, but there's a million other meetings that we probably don't know are happening. And I want to understand what your framework is for deciding whether to take minutes or not.
It's judgment. I haven't written a policy that says these meetings must be formally minuted, these may be, these may not be. So formal council meetings such as this are formally minuted. I'm pretty sure that's a legal requirement. We do it anyway. Formal meetings around safeguarding, for example, will be formally minuted. All the many other meetings that take place, there's just judgment and frankly custom and practice. I suppose we
whose judgment?
The judgment of the relevant officer who's chairing the meeting.
Would it be possible for me? I just want to
Sorry, we just introduced.
I'm Vicky Police and I'm the interim corporate director for inclusive economy and housing. And I just really wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of comfortable and understanding which meeting we're talking about here, because I noted Councillor Chadder's reference to Darren's role as non-executive director. So to be clear, the meeting that we are talking about here is the Populo Living shareholder and funder meeting, which is internal council officers meeting with Populo officers. to discuss sort of matters of Populo performance, how individual projects are going, how progress is being made in the developing the business plan, matters of that kind. So sort of action-oriented matters, if you like. We're not talking about the Populo board, which is a separate thing.
So again, what's that?
The shareholding.
What the meeting that we're referring to here, which action notes are taken and not formal minutes, is not the Populo Living Board. The meeting we're talking about is our internal shareholder funded discussion.
We're all clear on that, and the problem with it is that the internal audit has said that was a key area of scrutiny. It was actually one of the, and that's why we're saying, look, we shouldn't be stepping in and doing the scrutiny. Actually, it's one of the key areas that we scrutinise internally and that the council scrutinises it. And that's why we think there should be minutes so that you can have that memory and everything.
And also, my wider point isn't actually about that specific meeting or any specific meeting. What I'm concerned about is the council has some process for deciding whether minutes are taken. We've sort of established that that's judgment. As an audit committee, we've come to a different opinion about whether minutes should be taken or not. And that difference concerns me because it suggests that we don't have confidence in the council's process for deciding that. It's not about any specific meeting, and it's actually not about Populo. It's about wider concerns that I now have because we've come to a different conclusion. And it opens up this whole Pandora's box about how the council decides whether certain governance processes are needed or not. So I appreciate your point, Vicky, but it's not quite about Populo.
It doesn't concern me. It's perfectly normal for different reasonable people to come to different reasonable opinions on a matter.
Okay, Councillor Chowdhury, please.
No, this is quite concerning. So you've got a shareholder group whose role is to provide advice, doesn't have any decision-making power. You don't take minutes because you think it's an.
Can I just correct this?
Can I finish?
Yes, sorry.
So to me, that said, this isn't an important meeting. We don't think it's important to take minutes. We don't think it's important to record the meeting so that other people can see what advice was given in the shareholder group meeting. Therefore, what would you see as the point of that meeting if it's not worthy enough of taking?
So the meeting.
Sorry, Councillor Chowdhury. Can you just?
I just wanted to correct because I'm actually looking here at a note for shareholder funder meeting. And while it is not a verbatim minute, it has a short summary of what was discussed and it has action notes. So I'm worried that this conversation is leaving the impression that no record is taken of those meetings, and that's not the case.
So that's a point to make to Andy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Andy, could you come in, please, and clarify, please?
Right. So we are saying that in terms of the other thing it might be worth adding is obviously we can only work with what evidence is given to us at any given time. Sorry,
carry on.
So consequently, whether this piece of evidence, whether this instance is something we've seen or not seen, I clearly don't know at this moment in time. But generally speaking, we would only work on the basis that what is not, or rather is not available. Now, referring earlier, the report does quite categorically say on a number of occasions, referring to an earlier point that you made, and I can go to the report. The top of the report, key findings, the third paragraph down, we're talking about finding limited evidence rather in support of this. And this is talking about the general level of scrutiny. And so obviously we've made this point that evidence has been sparse in relation to what we've been given, what we've been shown. It's not looking like something that is comprehensively produced, on each occasion, shall we say?
Okay. Who did you request? What specific information did you request, and what did you receive?
Well, we asked for a whole host of different pieces of information of different individuals.
Okay. So, Andy, in reference, I think you're saying on page 25, the terms of reference state the company is scrutinised by the council's shareholder group as an accountability mechanism. Although we have been advised that the group performs a robust level of scrutiny on the information provided by the company, we have found limited evidence in support of this. Okay, so I would want to know what information you requested against what you received, and then what was the quality of what you received, able to say you found limited evidence. Evidence shows that checks are done for accuracy and reasonableness, but we've only found limited evidence demonstrating the council is holding the company strictly to account by robust monitoring of the effectiveness of its financial and operational performance, challenging commitments made in previous business plans and ensuring that it continues to meet strategic objectives. I think this is where, what did you receive and what was requested? Would be helpful for the committee to know, to be able to make their own decision about what you received and what you requested and why you didn't receive what you requested.
May I make a suggestion? Why don't we perhaps circulate 2 or 3 recent examples of the notes of recent meetings, and then the committee can then say whether you think that is sufficiently detailed or whether you would like to see much more detail in future.
Yeah. Chair, what Councillor Paul is saying is that it's not for us to assess that. We have the auditor who has said, based on what they've received, they don't think that the evidence is strong enough. We're in a position where we don't know if they've seen this piece of evidence. Showing that to us doesn't then tell us that it's good enough.
That's why I've asked for details of what was requested and what was received, because if you only received limited evidence, what did you request? Did you request 5 things and you only received 3 and the quality of the 3 you received was poor? Then that's an issue. If you requested 5 things and received 5, but they're all poor, that's an issue. But if you requested 5 things and received 1, that's an issue. So we need to know the quantum and where it is on the spectrum. So Andy, are you able to provide details of what evidence you requested and what you received in response to those requests? And also if you can put the timescale. So did you give them 2 weeks and you received it in the 3rd week, so you were already writing reports, so you weren't incorporating it? Let's see what it says.
Right. That's, I mean, certainly we could look into that to see what information we can provide to you in respect of that query. We requested a huge amount of information from the start of this audit to the finish of this audit, because we tested a whole load of areas basically, and we spoke to different people. Our conversations with individuals, in some cases, they explained to us how things worked. We therefore asked them for giving us evidence to support those conversations, those narratives. We weren't always able to get something that was that clear, but I think Conrad has admitted to that was the case. So I don't necessarily think that is in a dispute.
No, but
if you want us to provide and go back over everything that we've tested, to find out what was given and what wasn't given.
Yeah, just give us details of your testing plan. Give us details of your testing plan, what you requested and what you received.
Can I just ask Conrad, you know what those minutes are, those notes are that Vicky just mentioned? Did you send them over to them?
I didn't personally know. I don't know.
Were they sent?
I don't know. Not by me.
That's the key question that we need. Perhaps that's an action to be told after this meeting whether those meeting notes were sent to and considered in compiling this report.
That's why I've just requested a list of what was requested and what was received.
But quite specifically, those notes that Vicky's pointed out, because if they wasn't received, actually it may be already good enough note-taking happening. But they were never sent over to them to consider. So
yes, but Pauline, can you capture that point?
Capture that.
Okay.
Chair, if we can move on and just say, are notes and minutes and action logs taken of every single meeting?
Yeah, may I give an illustrative examples? I think it might be helpful in illustrating the point that Conrad was making right at the beginning about this, which was made on the assumption that that form of notes had been shared with the auditors. And that's this: at a recent recent shareholder funder meeting, we had quite a lengthy and extensive discussion about the impact of current interest rates on Populo's ability to deliver things against the model that they had done previously, and what the alternative ways might be that would be still within all the council's sensible governance mechanisms to allow them to continue delivery. And that resulted in the papers that you've recently seen coming to Cabinet in terms of the different ways that we're proposing to take forward the Pier Road and Cyprus development, for example. Now, there was probably half an hour of toing and froing and conversation in that meeting about the different options that were presented, what those might mean for the different what those might mean for Populo, what those meant for the council and so on. But that note was not taken verbatim of that discussion. At the end of that discussion, there was a note which said, it would have said something to the effect of, and I'm not looking at that particular note, so I can't remember, something to the effect of, it was agreed that we would explore options X and Y, and therefore, Andy may have seen that and said, I don't know, I'm not satisfied because it just said that, how long the discussion was, or he may not have seen it, and we don't know as yet which of those two things it is.
Sorry.
We move on back to the next item, because I think we had 20 minutes ago clarified there's a disconnect between what the auditor asks the officers, and there's a disconnect. We clarified that. We're going down a rabbit hole. It's clear from Vicky's last comment, those comments, those minutes or papers are not in the mix, and the action is to look at that outside the meeting.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry. What's your name? Could you?
I'm Deb Heenan. I'm the Chief Exec of Populo Living. So I thought it might be helpful just to go up a level and give you an overview that, with the benefit of hindsight, we could have sent to the auditors and they maybe requested from the wrong person. So we have a cycle, as with any company, of board level scrutiny. So non-execs from the industry and a trained accountant scrutinise us. And as you know, Darren Mackin is currently the representative of that board. So that goes through a cycle that dovetails with an audit and risk committee for the company, where specifically they choose internal areas to look at in very much the same way that you do as a committee. And then what dovetails with that are standing items, as the meeting that Vicky is describing, where we then go back to the shareholder with some of the same papers. So we cover always first thing on it, health and safety, because that is our number one risk for a company that is involved in construction, which is one of the two big risky industries in this country. Then we go finance, standing item, customer services, because if customers aren't happy, then there's a problem with new residents, and you also need to collect rent. And then we go on to non-standard items, followed by delivery, followed by key risks. And the kind of mix up, if you like, about the minutes, it's, as Vicky says, we don't have a verbatim discussion of those items recorded, but there is a summary and they're all gone through and all the paperwork is there. So if anyone in the committee had the question about corporate memory and you wanted to go back 2 years ago and see precisely what was gone over, you would have the set of papers that are all on record on both in my company and with the shareholder. So you can tell by the papers, here's the finance report, the customer services report, health and safety report, and non-standard items, because as Vicky gave one example, life is happening to us. So we were discussing interest rates primarily at the last meeting.
Thank you. We'll move on. The next item, conflicts of interest and appointments. Were any questions on that?
Yeah, I've got one.
Okay.
In the report, it says the interim director of Inclusive Economy is on the shareholder board, is the interim council representative, and is the main commissioner, and is in the process of being in charge of the recruitment process to a non-executive director. So there are 4 separate hats the report mentions. Have you got a comment on potential conflicts of interest you may have and how you manage those conflicts?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the questions.
Through you, Chair.
Sorry, of course, yeah.
Yes, please.
So I'm Darren Mackin, Director of Community Wealth Building. And yeah, like Councillor Paul says, the report does set out that I'm currently taking 3 quite different but related roles in regard to the company. And I think as a general point, what I would say there is it's not uncommon for council officers to have to wear several hats and to have to take several different perspectives into account when we're either in discussions about policy or providing advice or kind of assessing risk around particular courses of action that the council could take. So it's a fairly common position to be in. In terms of the sort of legal position of being part of the council's board and also having the popular board and also having that commissioning function is, as Conrad has said, decisions about investment in any particular scheme are made by cabinet, and obviously a whole variety of officers within the council, including legal, finance colleagues, advise members on any of those decisions. So I would be one voice of several in any of those discussions, and of course I report to the corporate director of Inclusive Economy, who is not on the popular board, and is obviously, as my line manager, part of those decision making discussions as well. So there's not ever a point where I have, as in this sort of dual role, have any particular influence over direction that the council would take in making decisions. When I'm on the board of the company, obviously the company is wholly owned by the council, and the company therefore strategy is aligned to our council's strategy. So I see it as my role primarily to ensure that that is delivered and that the council is protected from risk, because the risk is obviously the companies as the councils. We're all part of the whole group, and that's how we kind of manage that.
Papers. So on the shareholder group, which has got overall governance, we sit on that body.
That's right, yeah.
And who's your boss?
And the corporate director.
Right.
Yeah.
But director sits on there.
Yeah.
Right. So the very person who oversights you is in the same meeting as you, right? Are you on the same level in that meeting, or do you defer to your boss in that meeting?
And what's the Conrad, as the corporate director of resources, as chair of the meeting?
So in that meeting, are you on the same level, or is there hierarchy in that meeting?
Well, I would say the way the discussions work in that meeting is everybody contributes. And as Conrad said, it's an advisory group.
Okay. You're also on the Regen and Housing Delivery Board.
Yeah.
Your boss is also on that board. How do you function in that meeting then?
So that Regen and Housing Delivery Board, so that meeting is focused primarily on council regeneration projects. So that would be, you know, the area regeneration projects that we deliver, and also the affordable homes for Newham projects.
And also on the Carpenters Strategic Implementation Group, also sitting next to your boss. Do you not see, but you're on 3 different boards with your boss, and each of these feed into each other. Do you not see a potential of conflict of interest?
So, I mean, from my personal perspective, I don't think there is a potential conflict of interest there. I think, as I said, it's fairly common to be involved in numerous different discussions and meetings within kind of an officer's role.
Things like this, often the perception is what we've got to manage.
Mm.
So I've just gone through the top 3 things on a piece of the paper, 3 separate meetings, look at different strategic areas and different resolutions, where your boss, the person who oversees you, sits on that same meeting. So you could see a Martian, if I can use that word, looking at that, could potentially see a conflict of interest. Do you agree? I'm asking the question.
Well, I certainly think, you know, it's not unreasonable for somebody to say that. As of what I'm saying is, I don't feel like there is, but, you know.
No, well, I'll be more direct. I don't think that is a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest occurs when someone, for example, as a company director, you know, is representing or has responsibilities to 2 organisations whose activities and interests may not be aligned. So to give an example, it would certainly be inappropriate for me to be a member of the Popular Board because, for example, you would be looking at you know, signature of loan documents and so on, effectively on both sides of the transaction, you know, sort of advising the council on authorising it, advising the company's board on recipients. And that would clearly be a conflict of interest. I don't think there is any conflict of interest at all in an officer attending 1, 2, 3 or more meetings on, you know, matters within their area of work, at which their manager or indeed people who report to them are also at those meetings. And or to put another way, very blunt, but you know, clearly you want the right people in the room for those decisions. You know, if you think that there is a conflict of interest there, you would have to take one of those people out and not have the benefit of their advice and presumably replace them with someone who doesn't know the subject area. And I just don't think that's tenable. So I genuinely don't think there is a conflict of interest there.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Councillor Higgins, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm reminded about what Councillor Booker said earlier about the council not necessarily being willing to invest sufficiently in good governance. The auditor has said the council does not have appropriate arrangements in place to manage potential conflicts of interest. And what the council has said back is, we don't agree there's a conflict of interest and doing anything different would be less efficient. And I don't think it'd be responsible for us as an audit committee to, these are diametrically opposed views, essentially, as far as I can tell. And I don't think it'd be appropriate for us as an audit committee to essentially take your word over the auditors. And reading this another way, what it essentially says is, we think the efficiency gains are justified enough that we're not really concerned about this conflict of interest that the auditor is raising. That concerns me, and I don't know why we should take your word about this over what the auditor has said, that they don't think that there is sufficient arrangements in place to manage conflicts of interest, and you're just saying, well, there aren't any.
Sorry, just to be clear before you bring the auditor in, I haven't said there aren't any. I've said at the internal meetings that Councillor Paul referred to, I don't think that there is any conflict of interest at all, nor does the audit report suggest there is a conflict of interest in having a manager and someone who reports to them, etc., both at the same meeting or at a series of meetings on a similar theme. That is not within the definition of a conflict of interest. Conflicts do exist or have the potential to exist when someone is representing or has a role in two organisations, two different legal entities, Popular Company and the council. So there's the potential for conflict there. We've certainly drafted, but not yet quite finalised, because we're just getting a bit of legal advice on it, a more much clearer protocol for managing those that was not in place previously and ought to have been. Just so that everyone's responsibilities in those situations are clearer. But as Darren has also explained, there are many other checks and balances that constrain that role. And when one looks at a conflict of interest, the job is not to prevent all conflicts of interest happening, because that's virtually impossible. It's to ensure that where they do exist, there are clear arrangements for managing those. And those were probably clearer in my mind than they were written down, and hence we've drafted a protocol on that now. And that those checks and balances therefore mean that the conflict of interest doesn't actually give rise to any poor governance. So and I've not suggested at any point that we're interested in sort of reducing levels of governance. I think very strongly that the governance of the council is an extremely important matter, and I haven't suggested that we should reduce it.
Vicky, could you come in, please?
I don't think it's necessary to say a great deal. I simply wanted to emphasise the point that the purpose of having, for example, Darren and I in the same meeting is that we can provide different and complementary perspectives on a particular issue. And that in no way, in my view, conflict.
I am actually, question for that. I'm not querying whether you should be in the meeting or not. I'm not querying that. Conrad said there are clear processes in place or whether we effect to manage conflicts, right? But the report said there's no policy for managing the conflicts. And this is where the contention comes. Conrad has just said, there is clear processes in place to take away anything. But the report says there's no policy stroke process for managing conflicts. So again, this comes back to the earlier part of the meeting. We're not, arguing with you about whether you're right or whether you're wrong. The issue is the report's saying this, you're saying that, and we're going, hold on, where's the issue? So I just wanted to put that on the record,
So no, I take point, just be clear, just to emphasise it, because I said quite a bit that we have drafted a policy on managing conflicts that ought to have been in place previously. As I say, it was probably clear in my mind, but because it didn't exist when they did the audit. Right. So we have, subsequent to that, drafted it, taking a bit of legal advice and getting it finalised.
Sorry, Conrad, when do you think that it will be ready for implementation? How long?
I'm sure it'll be available by the date of the next audit committee meeting.
Okay. If that could be supplied, that would be great.
Just to be clear, Popular Living does have a conflicts policy, and there is a declarations at the beginning of every board meeting, as you would expect.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on now, thank you. I'll move on to the next theme, council risk management and scrutiny. Are there any questions on this matter, please?
Management of risk.
Risk management. Which please, sorry.
Deborah, if you would be so kind, who's responsible for filing Poplar's accounts?
Popular.
Is there not the name of the individual, but there's a specific role in there?
Yes, so there's a formalised process of producing accounts, bringing those accounts to Audit and Risk Committee. Then Audit and Risk Committee go through those accounts. Those accounts are presented to our board, which then scrutinises them and either agrees to sign off or asks further questions before they're signed off.
Does the shareholder advisory group have any oversight or input into the?
That's with Darren as the representative on that board.
Okay.
And obviously, you know, on a day-to-day basis, my finance team has a very close working relationship with the council's finance team because yes, there are the formal accounts, but much more importantly, there's a week in, week out, cash in, cash out, managing risks around cash and transactions. And what's really critically important to managing that risk is the quality of that collaborative relationship.
And the reason why I'm asking, because your accounts are not showing up at Companies House, it's showing that you're late. And what I'd be interested to understand is that's a risk. But any, in the charity world, any organisation that is in the red on Companies House does not get funding, you know, unless there's a very good explanation, and there may well be.
There is.
But what I'm concerned about is how does the council inform about that?
Okay, so as soon as that risk emerged, which came from our auditors looking at the accounts, there was one overriding concern with Audit and Risk Committee. We had the meeting. Straight after that meeting, my chair called Conrad to inform him that what had happened the previous night before the board meeting. And we had agreed at the meeting that we needed to take some further actions to assure our NEDs that there were sufficient checks in place that they could sign the accounts. And we informed immediately, then we did the piece of work together and the accounts were agreed and submitted before Christmas.
Of that?
Yes, there is. Yes, there is.
Email chain or how's that discussion?
So we've got formal meetings, a formal detailed record of Audit and Risk Committee. We've got a formal detailed record of the board meeting. And then we have followed up. And again, as Vicky is saying, that's the sort of thing that came up in detail at the shareholder meeting. It's been recorded. So there is a clear audit trail of everything that happened.
Reassuring. And just one final question on that. You obviously are at risk of a fine now, where you will be fined.
No, we have submitted. The accounts were filed before Christmas.
So they were filed, but they're not showing up on Companies House.
They should be. I'll check what's okay.
Have a look now. They're not.
Okay. They were.
Can you come back to the committee?
Yes, absolutely.
On two
Yes.
things. One, that you haven't been fined as a company.
Yes.
You have been fined. Is that coming out of the directors or is that coming out of public funds?
Okay, I will confirm that. I sat beside the relevant person and signed the piece of paper on the 16th of December, so I'll check why it hasn't shown up.
Okay, thank you. Pauline, just note that for actions to go back about letting us know about the accounts, please.
Yes.
Councillor Booker.
Thank you. I think my concern around the risk management stuff, that it says that you agree more should be done to formalise the risk management arrangements. My concern is around the people that have to make decisions in what feels like a bit of a vacuum of information that they may have been getting. And so I'd like to know, even if there wasn't formalised ways of managing risk, particularly around financial risk, what information were Cabinet getting in order to make decisions that would take financial risk into account? And also, how did we ensure and how are we ensuring that the risk is within our council's overall risk appetite levels?
Okay, so if we, the kind of key risk on Popular or from the council side is when you agree new funding packages for new pieces of work. Obviously, you then obviously have a significant element of risk as you go through the construction period on that, and more and more as the assets come out of the ground, your risk reduces. So the key risk moment from the council side is when it is agreeing a funding package for what is by definition a high risk activity, house building. So the sorts of things that are done on that, and colleagues will come in, perhaps Hayley, I might look to you in a minute in terms of the scrutiny that we conduct of that, but there will be a detailed financial model produced showing the development, the likely costs associated with it, and all the things that one would expect, which will also have sensitivity analysis of that, so we will understand for example, if inflation changes by this or interest rates by that, what effect it would have on the viability of the overall project. And if one looked at the cabinet reports, Pier Road in December is probably quite a good example of that. You will see that set out in quite a lot of detail, probably over 2 or 3 pages in the cabinet report, explaining the kind of key salient factors from that and the key risks that we face. I think there's sort of 2 other parts to the matrix for them. I don't know which order you want to take them in. Might be helpful if Hayley explained in a bit more detail how the council's finance department scrutinises what's presented by the company, so that we know that that is reliable and robust, and equally from Darren and Deborah, if I could turn to you then, how we ensure ourselves that the assumptions around building and all those important development activities are reasonable and can be relied upon to the extent that anything can be relied on at the start of the project.
So based on the fact that 2 other people might come in, could I ask my 2 supplementary ones, and then you guys can answer all of those at the same time? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
So just based on what you said, Conrad, were those kind of when those particular projects and particular programs go to cabinet and things, for example, are we only looking at the viability based on that particular program, or is the information that members are getting to do with the entirety of Populo? So it's not just looking at project by project, because of course you could have 1 project doing brilliantly and 5 doing terribly, and that would ruin everything. And is that put within our broader risk management of our own finances within the council as well? So is that clear? And also, when there was the period of 12 months without a business plan, how were we ensuring that we, how were we getting that information? How was that financial information being assured to us when there was no business plan to refer to?
Okay, let me make one very quick point and then bring colleagues in. So the cabinet reports that we take on individual schemes are project based. That's probably a sensible point that I need to reflect on. It may be sensible to add more to them. We're already quite long about the sort of overall company viability. We don't specifically include those in those cabinet reports, but there are other mechanisms that cover that point. But it may be sensible to integrate those more in the future. To date, we have.
I just think, imagine being a member without having all of that kind of additional information. Actually, I think that would be a really useful piece of information to have, so they're not just making a decision on 1 project.
I think that's sensible. I'll bring you in, Hayley, on the sort of scrutiny of the financial models, and then on the development side.
If you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, it's Hayley O'Brien, Head of Finance, supporting Populo and Inclusive Economy and Housing. So we have a monthly finance meeting with Populo Finance colleagues, and that happens before the shareholder meeting. So we go over the monthly accounts, obviously highlighting if there's discrepancies or variances that we need further explained. So we'll pick up any risks, maybe around working capital, cash flows in and out. We measure this against our reporting that we do corporately. So the normal corporate budget report that we present every quarter. So you'll see that there's a Populo section in the capital report of the budget report that was presented in October. And the same for each quarter, there'll be a Populo section in there. So that will pick up, if there's been a scheme or if there's any risks of profiling around the capital programme. And yeah, then what obviously we present to the shareholder meeting as well. And then also with the business plan, so there's business plan scrutiny that obviously happens quite a few months in advance of it going, so we're already going through that process.
Sorry, can I just put
risk?
When there was no business plan, what were you scrutinising?
Sorry?
When there wasn't a business plan, what were you scrutinising?
Yeah, well, we did have a draft of that. So there is a draft that's sort of always in progress. So there's always a business model that is effectively live. There's a detailed financial model that works, and that's always being kept up to date. So it's always ready for when we're going to the next element.
So when members were making decisions, some of that information was based on this live document rather than a finalised.
No, so when we're actually reporting the next business, it will be based on comparison to the previous business plan. That will always be the case in the last reported business. Behind the scenes, we're obviously checking it against live.
And what was, maybe I've misunderstood then, so it'd be worth asking you about this period of time. So this report says that there was a 12-month period of time where there was no business plan. I presume that doesn't just mean that one was produced and then 12 months later the second one was produced.
No. Yes.
So there must have been.
Yes, so business plan is a strategic forward look and it is a good discipline. But as Hayley says, what we did was we went through the work, and you remember we had pandemic, there was a lot of changing in the market. So what we realized is we had a draft business plan, but it was already so out of date because the world around us had changed so much. We had delayed it and then made the decision that there was little point publishing one that we knew was already so far out of date because of life had changed around our ears so rapidly that we just deferred that one. So I've got a draft business plan that people wrote and it sat in a drawer, it never got published. In hindsight, we probably should have just published it and said, this is now, it's a forecast, it's a long range strategic, it is out of date, but just to be clear that we do go through this discipline together every year. And what we've agreed is regardless, that even though when you get to with the delay in modelling, publishing and going through cabinet, even though it might be quite out of date, you just publish it anyway and put a flag on that.
Sorry, could I just bring in Andy there? Were you made aware of what was just said about the business plan when you were doing the audit?
In relation to the draft version, you mean?
Yes, because it's the comment that there was no business plan. So the explanation that's been given, was that given to you?
I don't believe we were aware that there was a draft one that wasn't published.
So I think also just in regards to viewing the overall business and the inherent risk in the business, and other developers will tell you, like Berkeley Homes, is they view their overall business as a series of investments. So every site is a mini investment. And that's why when we go to cabinet with a VAR, it's looking at that investment because most of the risk is on the product that you build and how you build it. And when you've built it, for whatever you cost, you have built it and you have to live with it for the next 50 years as you rent it out. And also health and safety, the big risk is in the construction side as opposed to when the asset is completed. So if you're looking at a business plan, it's about the long range forecasts and how the external market has changed and what sites are available and when you're likely to be able to bring those sites forward, depending on planning conditions or control or clear up of contamination, if we were talking about Cyprus.
And
that work is
why we're different. The reason why we're different to Berkeley Homes and things like that is because it's public money. And so I understand what you're saying around that, you know, doing things project by project but actually there needs to be higher levels of scrutiny, and us proving that through having things like the business plans up to through having those things, we need to be able to prove that we are operating like that because it's. Yeah.
So, Chair, if I may, so it's not that we ignore the global picture. I'm just what I'm saying is that for us to manage the business really effectively, we go down to a granular level and scrutinise with finance colleagues what's happening on those site-by-site bases, because that is the best way to understand the business. And if there is anything happening by benchmarking each site against each other, because we're in one geography called Newham, That's the best way to get your arms around the risks, and then we build it up to, you know, the whole global risk register, but it's built up from the bottom up to give the global picture.
Okay, thank you. Vicky, did you want to come in on that?
Just briefly, just to say that, and the other point to make, of course, is that, you know, in broad terms, yes, of course, Populo is an aggregate of projects, and all those projects are spending public money. We've talked about how Cabinet are the ultimate decision maker on all of these areas, and when circumstances change for individual projects that mean the risk has increased, then we go back to Cabinet and ask them what we should do and ask for agreement to proceed. So again, the Pier Road and Cyprus decisions that were made late last year are another good example of that. So circumstances changed, which meant that the previous model and the way we used to finance Populo for that next phase of work didn't work financially. We officers discussed and concluded that on balance, it was better to proceed with the next phase, not to the full development phase yet, in order to continue momentum of the project, and that there was a way of doing that that was sensible financially, albeit with much narrower margins. The finance report, the finance section of the Cabinet report fully flagged that the margins were limited and that this was a proceed with caution recommendation. And on balance, Cabinet made the decision that they would go with that officer recommendation.
I think that this is exactly where actually my comment to Conrad is that do Cabinet have, because that's great that they've got all of that on just that particular project, but actually, how do they know that this is still within our risk profile for the whole of the council? How do we know that so for example, the tower that was 45% over budget, well, they might have made a decision to go, yes, we'll go 45% over budget in this one, but actually what impact does that then have on all of our kind of risk management across all of our things, not just the one project? I think that that's ensuring that the decision makers have all of the information about all of the risk to all of the parts of the council, not just per project.
And that's why we report quarterly to Cabinet on the financial position in year. I think you're right that when we're taking these big decisions on major capital schemes, we could probably do more to sort of add the, you know, if you like, more than a cross-reference, but you take my point, the kind of cross-reference to that alongside the project-specific details. I think that's probably a very sensible suggestion, but, you know, Cabinet are aware of it because they get those quarterly reports and they're considered there. But, you know, I agree with the point that it is probably sensible to kind of link those two more strongly when we're taking those big investment decisions.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Higgins, please.
Chair, I'm just noticing that I think this is the second or third section. I think this is the second time that we've been sort of provided assurance based on information that seems not to have been provided to the auditor. And I also noted that this audit was set up with no intention of providing an assurance level or an assurance opinion. And I'm just wondering whether at this point we might say, well, actually, maybe there does need to be that audit, because clearly this audit doesn't reflect all the information that the council could have and maybe should have provided, or that Populo could have and should have provided. And it's not giving us the assurance that we seem to want. It's not about this section. It's just I'm noting that this is happening again, that there's a draft business plan that the auditor didn't have. And so it's now making me think that this audit is somewhat not fit for purpose. And maybe we might need...
Chair, can I just interject there? I think colleagues at the offices of the council have indicated their awareness of the shortfallings in the audit and have committed to it. I don't see any purpose in recommissioning an audit at this stage when we're in the middle of updating processes. Much rather, could we ask for an audit this time next year when some of these...
It could be a follow-up audit. We could ask...
I actually wasn't coming with that specific recommendation that you just said perhaps isn't a good idea. It's raising the point, and I'm new to this committee, so I don't know what needs to happen next. No, this report is from the first meeting, so it's essentially for a first meeting, but I take your point, and that sounds like a good suggestion.
So what are you suggesting, Councillor Chadden?
That what's now January, that in December this year we collect another audit.
Yes, I think that's fair, because it will give it enough time to embed things and hopefully both sides can see it a bit better.
Sorry, We've already had the Grant Thornton, and I realise we haven't got to that bit yet, but we've already had the Grant Thornton report where they flagged up governance issues that we haven't then seen a response to that and how that's been put into place. We've already had an internal report by, I don't know, Vicky, whether it was by you or whether it was by your predecessor. There was an internal report that was done looking at governance as well that this talks about. And then we've had this. At what point do we kind of say, oh, this is the answer, you know, or well, we're just not going to try and fix things. We're just not going to create an action plan because we haven't had an action plan from the Grant Thornton one anyway come forward. So I don't know, it just feels like doing another one in a year's time. We've already had one from 2021 or 2022 that nothing's happened about.
I mean, you know, as Councillor Higgins was making the point, I was sort of writing down follow-up audit to be arranged, although it's 6 to 12 months down, you know, that could be December 24 or a bit sooner. The point is that you know, that's the point of the follow-up audit is, you know, we've had the work, it's identified issues that need to be addressed. We've also provided some clarification on those issues in this discussion. You know, I'm relaxed whether it's sort of sooner than December 24, but what I think the committee is looking for is assurance against these pieces, you know, that everything has been done. And so, you know, if it's helpful, you know, what we could do subsequent to this meeting is kind of create an action plan that says, you know, these are the 10 things that everyone was most concerned about or whatever, and then at some future date to be determined, you can have another audit that would then check, you know, is there evidence that those things have actually been done? Is there, for instance, a conflict of interest protocol that's written down and shared officers and so on?
That's a good idea. Pauline, did you get
an action plan and an audit against the action plan in December 24?
Yeah. Okay, Councillor Chadwick, please. Sorry, Councillor Chowdhury, sorry.
Going back to my first question about housing costs, it'd be good to think about the value for money consideration.
Sorry, could you speak up, please?
Going back to my first question about how much it costs to commission this audit, it'd be good to think about the value for money considerations the next time we commission it. So thinking about exactly what you as the council want to get out of it, because it's you recommendations, and then properly providing evidence to the auditors. Because like Councillor Higgins says, it seems like we're coming back after the audit saying, here's the evidence, here's the evidence, here's the evidence that should have been given beforehand, kind of rendering it a bit witness.
I think that last point is a recurring theme that's giving me concern, not to do with this report specifically, but more generally, is the way council officers don't always engage with the audit process as they should do. And I think there's a general point there about actually, you know, it is a kind of really important, you know, part of our overall governance and control framework. And I will be using this meeting and others as examples of that to kind of really emphasise to colleagues, you know, the importance of doing so. Because you want information here that's you know kind of reliable and tested on the evidence. And if people haven't engaged with it, you know, I'm not suggesting that's the case here, but you know, there's a theme that we've seen in other audits, isn't there? And I will be absolutely emphasising that point to colleagues.
Okay, Councillor Hudson, what is your point?
Yeah, it was a follow-up question to Councillor Chadder about the filing of the accounts. And the question is about the date that the accounts were signed. But I note that Popular Living was signed on the 15th of December. Last year's accounts were signed on the 8th of September. And Popular Homes was signed in September of last year. So what was the problem in signing off the accounts that you had the delay of 3 months to sign off the account on the 15th of December? And I also note there's a slight difference in the director's report in this year's account to the director's report in last year's accounts, and it's about the assurance from Newham Council, I think.
Right, okay. So we're an arm's length company. And as I said earlier, we've got some NEDs who are drawn specifically from industry and registered providers, and they're providing a level of scrutiny from that perspective. the chair of Audit and Risk had a specific concern that we weren't going to have enough working capital to be a going concern. And with Darren sat on the board, which is where having an LBN rep is so helpful, despite his explaining how council systems and processes work, quite rightly, that chair of Audit and Risk was doing her job and challenging back and saying, yes, I know you're completely owned by the council, but I have a job to do. And as a non-exec director, if this was any other company, we have to operate at the level of scrutiny, and I do not yet have enough concrete evidence that you have enough working capital to be a going concern. And you telling me, Deborah Heenan, with Darren Mackin, that there is a cabinet process that will be gone through and everything will be okay is not enough. And even though you are wholly owned by the council, it's still not enough. So the accounts were late. It was quite frustrating, but at another level, it will hopefully give you some assurance at the absolute level of scrutiny that we get from our non-execs and how they're not prepared to just sign something off because we're part of the public sector, we're owned by the council, and it'll all be all right on the night. It's quite the reverse. So that led to a delay in the accounts whilst we went through the cabinet process and the auditors came back, and that's why we had the meeting before Christmas, and therefore the Neds had the assurance and agreed the accounts.
Might be sensible for us to change when it goes to cabinet, don't you think?
So what happened was working capital is determined by external interest rates because the working capital is subject to those external interest rates. They went up by 0.5%, then another half, then another half. And very quickly, where we were in a comfortable position of staying under our £40 billion limit, and we were going to have the scheme at Pier Road go ahead, two things happened. The external world changed yet again quite rapidly in interest rates, and also the entire industry is furious that the second staircase issue was supposed to be resolved. Many companies lost a huge amount of money. We had the impact on us was a major delay on the Pier Road scheme, which means that we would have money that was sitting in working capital that was due to come out. So it was quite an extreme case of life happened to us. But again, we knew that because we're wholly owned by the council, we would work it out together. But again, Audit and Risk Committee Chair doing her job and the Audit and Risk Committee doing their job, saying, by the book, we do not have enough assurance, so we will not sign.
Thank you. Councillor Chad, a final point, please.
Sorry, I think we were talking at cross purposes when I asked my question earlier. My reference was to, at what point did you inform the council that your accounts were late? You said in your answer that you thought that the accounts had already been filed, so you couldn't have had that discussion with the council.
Sorry, the accounts were late back in March, so we first had the meeting. So as soon as we were going to have the working capital issue came to the fore, we of course.
But you didn't inform the council that your accounts are late at Company's House. You couldn't have done because you've only just found out yourself this evening.
So I'm checking on that right now because I signed the papers before Christmas. So
no, I mean it is what it is. But my question is about the process of risk.
No, so the accounts. So sorry, two different issues. So when we had the board meeting and the accounts weren't signed, we went and informed the council. So that period has been going on for months. So the accounts were formally signed and should be at Company's House now, and I don't know why they're not showing up. So I'm checking that.
Okay, but the process issue.
No more points, please. We need to move on.
Just a question back to Conrad and Hayley. In July, the corporate accounts, the group accounts came to audit board in July, which included within those numbers Popular. Okay? But the accounts were signed off in December. So just in terms, I'm not an accountant, so excuse the ignorance of the question. But was there any material difference from the quoted in July accounts to actually what happened
by the end of the year? Because there was obviously a time lag and there must be a different financial lag. So what was the impact of that lag and how was it being recorded? And is there any material difference?
So, I mean, it's normal when you present your accounts, obviously they're in draft at that point, so we would have consolidated the Popular draft accounts into them. I don't know offhand what the difference was between the final Popular accounts and the draft Popular accounts. Hayley, I don't know if you know offhand, when that would naturally come through Audit Committee anyway, because the revised accounts for the council, which as everyone knows are delayed because of national issues in any event, when those are finalised, that would include the principal, well, it would include all the changes to them, and we would explain the principal ones. So to the extent that any numbers actually change within Populo, as opposed to it just being a delay, and I don't know the answer to hand, but that would then be picked at that point by the Audit Committee.
Yeah,
so you're going to get that.
Stuff happens. Just want to assurance that we've got an oversight of any materiality, and we've got some oversight of that.
I mean, we've got that. I just don't have it to hand.
We need to move on, please. I'll now move on to the next theme, reprofiling dividend payback and extending loan covenants. Are there any questions on this theme? Councillor Paul.
Yeah, I've just got a few. Part of it's just to, and I'll do them in quick succession.
Please.
So Popular was set up as a standalone entity back in the day, and we fed it with loan and working capital to be arm's length. And I quote, Deb used the word arm's length 10 minutes ago. But looking at the report, I think it's page 27, it says Popular is not financially independent of the council, right? So where are we? What are we? You know, because 1 minute we're supposed to be arm's length, then this says we're not. What are we?
I think it's just terminology. And Populo has never been independent of the council because Populo from day one has owed the council sums of money. Yeah, it's arm's length. It's a separate legal entity, and we respect that. We allow it to operate, you know, with that degree of arm's length freedom, if you like. So, you know, for instance, when this changed a few years ago, but in its initial formulation, it sat outside the public procurement regulations because that's the way the company was set up. We subsequently changed that. So, I mean, I think it's just different terms and emphasis put on them. You know, it's never been independent of the council. It's always owed the council a lot of money.
At the beginning, we set up Popular to build homes and to attract the dividend back to the council to help us in our revenue, right? That was the initial outset.
Yes, to me, I mean, I wasn't here, but that's exactly how I understand it.
Now we seem to change the terms of that. We are foregoing the dividend. So we've taken out a loan for products, homes and dividends. And we made a decision now to not take the dividend to 2020 to 45, which has a material impact on our revenue. Is that normal that we as a council will take out a loan for one thing, i.e. homes, units and dividends? At some point down the road, we change our mind. Does not impact the loan covenant.
So, I mean, the loans were always taken out to build houses. Changed is the purpose to which those houses are. So the original intention of the company was to let largely or wholly, colleagues who were here at the time may know, I don't know exactly, but with much more of an emphasis on private rented properties in order to provide an income stream back to the council. 2018, council via cabinet took a decision. This isn't an exact analogy, but I think it's probably good enough for these purposes. Sort of swap that dividend. So instead of getting a financial return in terms of, you know, a check every month or year or whatever, to forego that for a much longer period of time in exchange for getting a much higher proportion of affordable housing rather than private rent.
One final
policy choice that cabinet took.
And on your policy choice, it says in the report that the council decided to forego a short-term financial benefit for the longer-term social benefit. Right. What is the break point between those two things? At which point does providing social does not, at which point does financial consideration of the council override the social? What is that metric? What is that decision point?
That's politics. I mean, you have to, all the time, make decisions about, balancing, the financial cost of things against the social benefit that they bring. I think, to add to that in this context, where you are lending money on to a company and therefore exposed to the kind of significant risks associated with that, as opposed to just choosing between different service options, there is clearly a point beyond which you cannot go. So if you repurpose the company again in some way I can't imagine and put the first dividend back out till some date much further in the future, there's clearly a point at which that just starts to become an unreasonable financial decision. We haven't proposed that. I couldn't answer. There's not an exact answer that, well, out to 2047 is okay, but 2048 is not. I mean, it would depend on the sort of nuance at the time. Just as one other reassurance on that, we've never built any expectation of dividends formally into the council's budget. So it's not the case that there was a sort of expectation that in 2020 or 2025 or 2030 or whatever, we would be receiving a dividend of £1 million or whatever from the company. We've always been aware of it in the long-term financial planning that that's coming, but it's not that by choosing not to receive that dividend, we've had to cut some other service instead, because we never built that formally into the budgets, although it was clearly there in the financial planning.
Section 151. Obviously, you're looking at the financial stability of the council, right? Let's take it to the nth degree to make the point. At which point did you say no to the organisation, but you can't have any more social benefit? You've got to look at the finances. Where is that point?
Well, the organisation always looks at the finances. I just don't think there is a single answer to that. I can't say, this far and no further, except clearly that the council is under a duty every year to set a lawful budget. But, lawful budgets can include, as the council's does, Populo in its current format with the first dividend being paid, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly, 2045 or whatever it is. That's clearly not an absolute limit beyond which one could never go beyond that. Said I am worried, particularly since the policy change, I think I've got these dates right, but again, correct me if I get it slightly wrong. I think the original change in policy led to the date of the first dividend going back to 2041, and that since then changes in economic circumstances but no change in policy have pushed that back to 2045. Forgive me if I've got those dates not quite right, but it's of that order of things. So clearly I'm concerned because the longer that goes on, the more the council is holding the risk of properties that have not yet paid for themselves to the extent that they were intended to generate a financial return. So the risk increases, but there is not a neat answer that says next year will be impossible.
Thanks, Conrad. Before this, Higgins, as business cannot be concluded by 9 PM, I propose we resolve to suspend Rule 11 of the standing orders under 4.1 Council Procedure Rules and extend the duration of this meeting to 9:30 or until the conclusion of business, whichever is the soonest. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Councillor Higgins, quickly, and then we're moving on. One quick point, please.
Thank you, Chair. So we just had a very detailed conversation about whether dividends were built into the budget or not, but that's not the only concern raised in the findings, but it's essentially the only concern expressed in the response. Because the findings also raise concerns about saying, while the council has an exit strategy, they're not formalising the company's business case. We have not found any evidence to demonstrate that this strategy has been adequately risk assessed. That concern that's been raised is not addressed in the council's response.
Yeah, no, that would be a fair point, and I can add to that. Fundamentally, I mean, if the point is around risk, as it should be, the key point here, and I'm more than happy to take your point and to add to the answer if that's helpful. Unlike some other council house building companies, Populo has built some stuff. You've got hundreds of properties. I can't remember exactly how many is under management at the moment, but several hundred. And so if you look at the sort of life cycle of risk of a company like that, you start off with a very high degree of risk because you've got loans, debt, and no asset, and you're engaged in construction activity, which is high risk. And then as you proceed, as the company has done, and you build up an asset base, the overall risk reduces, because in the worst case, it's not what we would want to do, but if there was some major problem on a new scheme or whatever, you've got an asset that you can sell. Now, I haven't formalised that in an exit strategy, and perhaps I ought to, but I think the point is sort of pretty clear that if need be, the company has several hundred homes in Newham. Let's say those are going to be worth £500,000 each. I don't know the exact figure that could be sold in order to deal with a crisis position, and therefore your risk is significantly lower. That's probably why I haven't thought the need to kind of formalise an exit strategy, but if it's helpful to document that more clearly, I can do so.
I think it's just about essentially the robustness of the process, right? The auditor has raised a concern that we're supposed to consider as a committee, but we haven't had a response in writing, and it's frustrating when the council's response doesn't fully address the concerns raised by the auditor, because it means that we can't do our job in assessing whether a sufficient assurance has been provided. And so I appreciate, I don't have a strong opinion about whether you should risk assess an exit plan. The auditor has raised a concern about that, and therefore, from my perspective, the council has an obligation to respond to that.
And I agree that the response is short on that basis, and I apologise for that.
Conrad, is it possible to be detailed, please? Pauline, actually, quickly.
Very briefly. So there are three areas. The council lends money at commercial rates that it borrowed off the PWLB. So there's a cushion on the lending rate. And there is, you have elected as the council to exchange dividend for social benefit, i.e. more discounted rents. There are different levels on schemes that have just gone through in Cypress and Pier Road. And then thirdly, every year we value the asset base, which is part of the good governance in the accounts. And yes, the asset base is worth more than the opportunity cost to build that asset base, which is your exit strategy in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. No further questions on that point, please. I'll now move on to the next theme, business plans. Are there any questions on this? Councillor Chadder, please.
Questions. Is the requirement to produce a business plan in any form of contractual agreement between the council and so is there a kind of requirement that a business plan be written? And well, maybe that's the first question.
I'm trying to remember exactly how the shareholder agreement is written on that. So it's certainly the case that there is a requirement for the company to produce a business plan. I think it says...
It was every 3 years, and we thought it was a better discipline to do it every 12 months. Hence, we're doing it every 12 months.
Thank you. And then the second question is, it says the performance targets are consistently not being met by the company. On this section, other than the business plan, what other mechanisms does the council have at its disposal to manage performance and quality as well?
So, spoken about the shareholder group, I won't revisit all of that, but there's detailed financial information provided there and elsewhere, each month that covers those. In terms of the shift in the business plan, which I think is the thrust of your question, that taking one business plan to the next, that period of first dividend has pushed back. When that's clearly in the public domain and has been for some time, because at least since I've arrived here, I've always made sure that those business plans were reported to Cabinet in public. Whereas I'm not sure that was the case previously. So it's not that I appreciate. Colleagues may not have seen it in this level of detail, but it's not that the audit there is saying something that wasn't known. We knew that the performance had got worse. Our view was that was linked to external factors in the economy and so on, and therefore didn't mean that we sort of needed to intervene in some other way in the company, because the explanation for that made sense linked to inflation and interest rates and so on.
So I think what I just specifically want to understand is how is that information captured? Where is it stored? So is that a conversation? Leaving aside the issue around note taking, etc. How does the council know that?
Because there are cabinet reports.
But how does the information get into the cabinet reports? That's what I'm asking. What's the mechanism?
I mean, just on so back to that, the granularity of the interplay between my finance team and the council's finance team. So on a monthly basis, in order for the business to be successful, there are two big touch points. One, Conrad described, when we go with a viability model and agree we're going to build some homes, that those homes get built at those prices, and there's some headroom in, but there's no additional budget. And if the budget changes, we have to come back formally to cabinet. So that's the first big point of investment. And then there's a overhead costs, maintenance costs and rental income. Those are cash in, cash out, and they're monitored together on a month by month basis. So as soon as anything changes, we will all know about it because we're constantly monitoring them. And then they formally come through as a balanced scorecard to my board, who scrutinises them on a bi-monthly basis. So the finances and all the KPIs.
I think Councillor Chadwell, so how is it the council, is it Hayley's team that will feed that back to Conrad? How does it?
Darren sits on, he is there when the non-execs from the industry are scrutinising all those KPIs in a very, very granular fashion, down to detailed costs, going through a gateway process as we go to the latter stages of designing a scheme, and then through to how much our maintenance costs, how are they benchmarked, how are rental incomes, voids, arrears, how all of that is being managed very, very much down to a granular level. If any pass a flag of concern, then Darren is there to come back, and that would naturally get raised at the next shareholder meeting if there was a concern.
Sorry, so Darren, are you the author of the report that goes to cabinet that Councillor Chad is concerned? Who, I think that's where the information to who's the author responsible?
Yeah, so just clarify on the business plan document, it's scrutinised by council officers, including in my team, Conrad's team, and also legal, in preparation for a recommendation to cabinet. And what that means in practice is, for example, Hayley, and we've been meetings about this today, we'll look at the numbers, we'll look at the modelling, we'll ask questions about that modelling, scrutinise that level of detail. That then, through various conversations, including at the shareholder board, and if works through iterations of a draft cabinet report, that cabinet report is then ultimately obviously published in public alongside the business plan. So that's the process governance route where we get that assurance on the business plan.
Is that fine, Councillor Chad?
I'll take that.
Okay, Councillor Paul, please.
I'm just working out in my mind, Deb, what you just said and working out. So you said there were external factors during the year which caused you to go back to the council to get more capital.
No, sorry. Let me clarify that. First off, I've texted my governance lead. We've got proof that the accounts were submitted on the 15th, but Companies House have come back and said they will, because it's the holidays, they're taking a bit of time to process, but we've got proof of filing, which we always do.
So there won't be a fine, presumably.
So they're there, they just haven't updated their websites to confirm, but we've got the proof that they've received them, but they're.
That's fine, that's fine.
So the accounts are, they're not, there isn't an issue.
You've got this internal process to manage risk on a monthly basis. Now, you mentioned the external factors, and I'm summarising here, being quite negative, right? Post-COVID, right? So, have you ever paused any development to await better financial conditions? Because I estimate last year, Popular went back to the council for at least £35 million to cover additional costs which are not being forecasted, and you proceeded with the development. Other developers might say the external conditions are so negative, okay? The more we take from the council, we burden the council, and the council has its own financial issues. Have you ever paused a project
So when I took over in 2018, we went through every site and we absolutely paused. Post-COVID. So the
20.
Okay, so two big schemes, the one at Cyprus and at Pier Road have stopped whilst we decided internally, do we go ahead with these? Because life has changed so much with build inflation.
You went ahead, I'm just trying to get.
No, so we're going.
Did you proceed with the project?
No, we do not proceed blindly with projects. And that's one of the benefits of having seasoned residential developers on our board, to say that the shareholder wants stable investment and also wants. Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand the risk side, which was the early part of the question at the meeting. So on that project, Pier Road, Cyprus, you proceeded with the project.
We are
changed from the original.
We're proceeding with the design. We have not gone back to the council and said that we have got a deliverable scheme that is suitable for you to invest in for the next 50 years. So that may or may not happen, because that is about, you're absolutely right. We don't blindly just go ahead and build and come back and ask for the money.
Just for clarity, Chair,
yes, please move on, because
in order to proceed on that project, did not you drop the affordable housing component to ensure the viability was pushing its face?
Yes, because that's what development is about. Absolutely.
But there is a risk management. I'm in a risk management training at the moment. So you do take you don't pause, you adjust the project.
We do both, because there may be circumstances where it is not a good idea to proceed with the entire project.
Okay, please quickly.
So if I just make a point as well, because I think we changed the arrangement as well. So instead of it being an investment proposition and the full amount being kind of loaned to Popular, the council's taken it on as through a DMS contract. So in effect, we're paying Popular to provide services to get us through planning to detailed design. Yeah, and that sort of de-risks it, because we're not given the full investment loan until we're clearer on where we end up.
Is that the council giving you money to help your balance sheet, but not calling it a sub?
No, that's the council paying Popular to provide the service to get the scheme up to REBA stage 4.
Payment for services.
Yeah.
For the contract.
All right, final quick question, perhaps, Higgins.
Thank you. My original question was going to be, what scrutiny does the business plan get outside of cabinet? But because the report says essentially that the business plan doesn't get rigorous scrutiny, you've outlined quite a lot of the scrutiny that the business plan gets, which is great, but we're at another instance where the report doesn't reflect what we're being told. Why?
I suppose that could come back to sort of issues before around the information that's being provided to the auditors.
So I guess this just goes back to the general concern of officers engaging sufficiently with the audit process, which means as an audit committee, we can't do our job. So that is that in and of itself is a pretty big risk.
Yeah.
Is that something that we need on a risk register, that officers aren't engaging sufficiently with audit?
I think it needs to be
the deprioritization of internal governance and audit reporting from officers.
Yes, and it's what is the penalty for that? I don't think there is a penalty, so then people don't feel.
It's a wider corporate point here, because we've had meetings here when we've seen the corporate risk register not been updated for 9 months, right? So it seems to be there's across the board, I hate using the word corporate culture of not complying.
Compliance has been up as an issue.
And also not keeping the evidence. We had in the previous meeting, an officer tell us that the audit had found limited assurance on DBS checks and on right to work in it. And we were told that actually it's just that the evidence wasn't there. And it's like, well, I can't remember which colleague said it, but from our perspective, if the evidence isn't there, we should just assume
it's not there.
that it's not there.
Yes. I think we need to follow up on.
Chair, there is perhaps, the sanction on that on HR
there is a fine of £45,000 for the first person with no right to work, and subsequent fines of £60,000 for the first. It might be the penalty of non-compliance is the only thing perhaps the organisation might listen to.
I think it's something that chief exec needs to consider. Especially as he's.
Is that a recommendation that's going to the chief rather than passed on, I think, from the audit committee to the chief exec?
I've got the point very, very strongly, and I agree with it. And it's not limited to the audit process that there have been too many incidents. You know, I don't actually think this report is a particularly, problematic example of it, but the risk register is far more so. For instance, there have been too many incidents of officers, not complying or not complying as clearly and promptly as they should be, or however we choose to phrase it. With important corporate processes, that are designed, to try and ensure that we do the right things in the right way. I've got that point loud and clear.
Thank you. Okay, any further questions or we'll move? We'll now move on to the next theme, company review. Are there any questions on this?
Review 6. Okay.
Okay, we'll now move on to the next theme, Grant Thornton, an internal review report. Are there any questions on this theme?
Yes.
Councillor Booker.
So this is the thing that I mentioned earlier, that was both this review that said the funding of popular living working capital requirements should be reviewed as a matter of urgency, and the structure of the council's equity investment in popular living should be reviewed prior to further investments by the council. But it doesn't seem as though there was any kind of follow-up to this particular report in 2022, but then there was also something created by the director of the community wealth building, so I apologise, it was the incorrect person I said before, and was presented to CMT, but then there was no action plan drawn up or any follow-up from that either. The agreed action was we will collate this response, the response to this report as part of the process. I kind of don't understand what that means in terms of an action. I don't know what it is you're saying you're going to do.
So there's a sort of huge amount in that. In terms of the funding of the working capital requirements, I mean, has been picked up in a number of different decision points along the way, including, for example, the Beer Road and Cyprus development that we've been talking about a bit in this meeting. What I haven't done is kind of pull all that together into kind of one thing that shows, and this is how we have addressed that concern. Ditto the equity investment point. One of the reasons why we have shifted more to this model where, rather than Popular sort of owning land and building on it, we're kind of commissioning them to carry out planning and related development services for them. So I think all I was trying to do there is there's clearly a lot in that whole point, and giving the assurance that we would provide a document that demonstrated that all of that had been done or was appropriately in hand.
So are you saying that has already, all of the things that the Grant Thornton report said has been done, it's just that there isn't the evidence to show it?
It's not that there isn't the evidence. I think it's more that we haven't really sort of consciously framed it in Grant Thornton said this, we've done that.
Yeah.
There are a number of actions that one can see, for instance, the working capital requirements, we've covered many times in this meeting, you can see multiple points where that's been considered. What we haven't done is sort of pick up, Grant Thornton said this and we've done this.
I think I've understood.
They said that and we've done that. Yeah. And that's what I'm undertaking to collate, so you can see it all in one.
Really good. I think my question is, what's the point of commissioning these reports if we don't then have a response to the reports? So why do we spend money commissioning Grant Thornton to come and do stuff if we don't then say, right, this is our response to what they've done? And we kind of go, well, we're doing some of that here. Yes, we did. Oh, that was a good idea. Someone said in a meeting when they referred to the report. Yes, we'll definitely do that. It feels an unproductive way of doing it. And also the question around whether CMT are actually getting the regular updates, because it was saying that that also isn't happening.
So, I mean, I think there's a common theme here, isn't there? I mean, it is important that we demonstrate, that we have done things, in a way that is clearer and more definite than we have done to date. Again, I'm giving that assurance. You can see it from the discussion we've had. We've clearly been doing all those things. But I agree with the point that we should be kind of formalising that rather more than we have been doing to date. I don't know what I agree with the point, and that's why I just wrote the sort of one-line response to that, because collating all of that is a little bit of a task, and this was sort of shortly in the run up to Christmas, so it clearly wasn't going to be available for this meeting. But in terms of the actual recommendations that Grant Thornton made, I'm personally comfortable that we've picked up those points in action. What we haven't done is write a kind of formal response to that report.
Are you able to do that, Conrad?
Yeah. We can do that by March, as it says in the.
Thank you.
And the other thing about the report that the Director of Community Wealth Building presented to CMT in August 22, and the action plan that was going to come out of that, what's happened with that?
So the report was presented, there was an action plan produced, and the actions have been sort of tracked at officer level. So when we do the summary collating the information, we'll include that and show you the progress that's been made against those actions.
So is this another example of the auditors not getting the information in order for them to say that they don't know that the actions are being followed?
Yeah, I certainly the first CMT paper, I remember presenting that CMT paper and writing that CMT paper. From memory now, I can't recall if we went back with the action plan.
We have not been able to find any evidence of the action other than to set up the officer group to review the financial implications of the business plan have been taken to address any of the concerns raised.
Are you able to provide a copy?
Yes, so we'll pick it up as part of Conrad's point there by March 24, and we'll show you what progress has been made.
Is that fine, Councillor Vickers?
Yeah, it's fine. I think it's just another example of where you're saying something different to what the audits.
Councillor Paul.
Here's a question. You're the Conrad has given a number of, I will say the word, reflections and concessions about how we've got to do better, but he's answered from a section 151 point of view. And I wonder, as the executive director, or you're the sort of owner, let's say.
Yeah.
What's your reflection on this report? On the committee, but there isn't any assurance. And there's this thing on about if you don't have any evidence, does it exist? Just wanted to know what your reflection on tonight, listening for 2 hours on this thing, effectively is picked over the bones on how you manage a relationship.
Yeah. So I would agree that we have not been as good as we could have been with servicing the auditors with the necessary evidence. I am, in general, satisfied from direct participation in them that there is continual and robust challenge from the council to Populo in terms of how they're running the business, and that ranges from issues that we haven't even touched on here, like health and safety on site, which is considered at every shareholder funder meeting, through to the financial viability of new development projects as they come forward. And as I say, my satisfaction in that is due to continual direct engagement and challenge with Populo on those issues. So I think that in practical terms, the council actually does a good job keeping Populo up to the mark and make sure that our continued investment in Populo is wise and robust. I would agree that we evidently haven't done quite as good a job as we should have done in terms of documenting that and in evidencing it to the auditors, and we need to do better on that.
And you can see from the committee's point of view, if the evidence doesn't.
Yeah, I would.
Hasn't happened. You can.
I would agree that. I would say that, you know, Conrad has made the point about the trade-offs that always need to be considered in terms of the labour used in documenting things minutely versus other ways in which that labour could be used to progress projects. So
just on this, I think it's about what, £450 million the council has invested, around that figure, right? If you're a resident of Newham, would you not think they would expect you to take some notes about how you manage their interests? I just want to allay.
well, so firstly, I would say that we do take notes. So as I say, but we've talked about the fact that the outcomes of discussions.
Is there a new comment?
I just wanted to, because we brought it up again, and I thought we'd allayed that half an hour ago.
Yeah, I think.
So I would say that the other thing is that I think that if you look at the finance and other comments and the risk comments which are made in every cabinet report, whether that's the cabinet report that presents the business plan or the cabinet report with regard to individual projects, that you will see there lengthy page-long sections on each of those pertinent issues with regard to risk, with regard to financial implications and so on. And I think they do provide a good demonstration for residents that each project is considered. And I think you would also, we are, frequently we have conversations in which we say, okay, so sorry to keep using this Pierogi Cyprus paper, but it is the most recent example. The conversation is, okay, we're moving to this DMS model. We're moving towards that because we don't have the certainty as yet that this is an investable project, but because of other aspects of the climate and the importance of providing new homes for residents, it makes sense to at least continue through the design phase and take another check then. And literally in the conversations we had, and we need to make sure that the cabinet paper reflects the fact that this decision is being made on this basis and that we're not necessarily going to proceed to full development, and that the net present value assessment of this development is positive, but only marginally positive at the moment. So it's extremely explicit that the decision has been made on the balance of risk, as officers have understood it, with the support of experts in finance, etc., and that we will come back for a further consideration before we commit further resources to that project. So yes, I do think we do that in the right way.
Thank you.
I just want to really emphasise that point because the point was made about well, what do residents expect? Exactly as Vicky says, what you have is detailed cabinet reports that are pretty explicit. I mean, let me just read out a couple in this period example we keep talking about. As set out above, the schemes are only marginally viable. This means that there is very little margin for financial safety. These risks are set out in more detail below, and then you get 2 or 3 pages explaining all of that, and need to be weighed against the planned social benefits from the scheme. It's not as though residents can't see, very, very clear and very, very direct advice on the decisions that are being taken with their money. But I really think that I haven't disputed any of the conversations about internal minute taking and so on, but I think you've got to be clear that it is the cabinet decisions, that are the ones where you actually receive the formal advice, which, as I say, is very, very clear and direct on the basis on which schemes are being approved. Now, one could have a different view on whether cabinet should or should not have taken that decision. That's not really a matter for the audit committee. But just want to sort of push back against this idea that key decisions are being taken on residents' behalf without the benefit of robust and independent financial and other advice, because absolutely, that is available and it's very blunt.
Okay, so if I could just cut through to the chase there, so what you're saying, you've given advice to cabinet, the best technical advice ever, and they can either take or leave your advice by the minutes. Basically what you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that in this case, there is a balance of risk to be struck, and that is reasonable for cabinet to take on the basis that the schemes as assessed as a result of all that process produce a positive net present value, which is the basis for these decisions. If cabinet was proposing to take a decision that I felt went beyond those bounds, then the advice would change, and indeed I have statutory powers that I could consider or may even be under an obligation to use in order to prevent such a decision.
And the option to take, sorry, just step in, if that's all right, the option to go the development management services route and to just take the project to design stage at this point, rather than making the full loan to Populo to develop the entire scheme, which was what would normally happen at this phase, was a reflection of the fact of the marginal, current marginal nature of the project, the prospect that interest rates would fall and therefore the project would become more viable in future, and therefore on the balance of risk, the incremental approach of the relatively small investment in the development management services, which allowed us to keep the project going and potentially to take advantage of lower interest rates and cheaper construction costs in 12 months' time, was the appropriate route to take based on officer consideration.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Conrad. Any further questions on this point? Okay, we have covered the 7 themes in the report. Are there any other concerns from the committee about this report that have not yet been considered? No repeat questions, please. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for tonight's debate. There have been a number of useful questions and feedback from officers to take on board to improve the governance weaknesses identified. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands, is the report noted? Okay. Item 6, year ahead forward plan. In the absence of Nicola Wood, there are some report authors that the clerk is still awaiting confirmation on. This report sets out the items to be considered at each meeting for the municipal year. I ask the committee to consider if any changes should be made to the forward plan. Councillor Higgins, please.
Just before I say this, I'd like to note a potential conflict of interest because it relates to standards, and we are all members that are subject to the council standards proceedings. While on budget committee, it's been made very clear to us that one of the biggest risks to the council in terms of achieving its budget is relationships between members and between members and officers. And I have concerns based on my work here as a councillor and my dealings with the standards process that our standards processes aren't delivering what they ought to be. And so I thought that an appropriate way to address that risk and the risk to our that we've been made clear to on budget that presents is through audit. And I don't know whether there is, but we've only got 2 more meetings before the end of the municipal year, but I think it felt appropriate to raise it in this space that as a councillor and as a member of audit that I have quite deep concerns about reports being delayed for a year or more, papers not being published when they ought to be, unclear reasons for who gets to see reports and why, information not being given to complainants and respondents even after the meeting has taken place. All of these things and more, I'm quite concerned about the position that leaves us in terms of the risk to the council.
Okay, thanks. Conrad, could you come in, please?
I mean, it's impossible to respond in detail to such a sort of wide-ranging set of concerns in this meeting. My suggestion would be either if you wanted to put those to me in writing or to request a meeting with me and or the monitoring officer, we can go through those. I'm not sure the audit committee has got a locus to sort of review the standards process. I'm not quite sure whether that was or was not what you were suggesting, but I think there's a lot in what you said, and the appropriate route in the first instance would be, as I say, either to put those in writing, happy to meet you with or without the monitoring officer in order to understand what those concerns might be, at which point we will be able to form a view as to how they might be addressed or whether they should be addressed. I can't really say more without knowing the detail of those allegations.
I guess I was suggesting that I thought some kind of internal audit of the council's standards proceedings would be appropriate.
I think in the first instance, it would be best to meet with Conrad and, as he says, with the monitoring officer, set out.
I think it would be best to be with just Conrad, to be honest.
That's fine. Conrad, can you?
And any other members of audit who share my concerns as well, not just me. And I think perhaps that your being there might be a good idea, Chair.
Okay.
You wanted the chair there?
the chair is in charge of her own time, but yes.
That what you said.
Yes, yes. So action, Pauline, to arrange a meeting with myself, Conrad, councillor Higgins, and open it to other members of the committee if they have the same concerns as councillor Higgins. And from following that meeting, then a decision.
And I guess some advice about how we manage our own conflicts of interest throughout discussing this as well, because we are members that are subject to the standards proceeding, and I'm quite aware, or like, I don't want to be undermining the process either through audit. So it's a tricky territory.
I think that's why Conrad
I want to be aware of,
have the meeting and then identify the issues that you have, and then a solution and options can be raised following that. Okay.
Chair, I raised with you the prospect of bringing forward the confidential item on fraud from the April meeting. Can it be made to February? And I wondered, through your good offices, could you look at the February meeting?
I will do. I just need to, I want to contact the officer to see if that's possible. Prepare the work to be ready for February. Okay. All right. To members present in the room, may I see by a show of hands if the report noted? Thank you. Item 7, date of next meeting. The date of the next meeting has been scheduled for Wednesday, the 7th of February 2024. At the annual council meeting, the council agrees committee dates for the municipal. These dates are difficult to change because most evenings are accounted for and we have one chamber. The committee usually meets 6 times a year, which means we only ask for 6 evening meetings of your time. I appreciate this is for setting dates for the year ahead each May. I trust this is sufficient for the members and officers to make arrangements to attend. This concludes tonight's business. Before we end the meeting, I would like to thank everyone for their attendance, both officers and members, and for anyone attending online, to wish you good night, and thank you to those watching on YouTube. I now declare the meeting closed and ask the clerk to stop the YouTube broadcast.